if you're not physically active and you eat a diet high in ultra-processed foods, and you got your phone in your room and you don't have great sleep hygiene, good luck with your mental health, because you friggin' well need it, because you are swimming upstream. A diet high in ultra-processed foods, there was a systematic review and an umbrella review actually, that looked at all of the different studies that found that people in the highest amount of ultra-processed food consumption had a 48% increased risk of anxiety versus those low, and had a 53% increased risk of common mental health disorders. And this was class 1 convincing evidence. Why is that not on every front page newspaper?
I'm your host, Nick Brax, and this is Movie Mind, where I hold raw conversations with the world's leading minds about the hidden struggles behind their success and the mindset it takes to become the best version of yourself. Is there something wrong with your mental health? Or is it with the way you're living your life? Today I sit down with Dr. Paul Taylor, who's a former Navy aircrew turned neuroscientist and performance coach, to discuss why modern life is breaking our mental health and how hardiness could be the solution. Paul, so nice to meet you, mate. Thank you for making the time to come and have this chat.
Absolute pleasure. Thanks for having me on, Nick.
I appreciate it, mate. So before we jump into it, can you just give me a bit of a background on yourself and the work you're doing?
Yeah, sure. So like my background's a bit eclectic, but I think it's important in what I do right now. I'm ex-British military. I spent 8 years flying in helicopters in the Royal Navy. First of all, doing anti-submarine warfare. Then I did helicopter search and rescue. I also went through combat survival and resistance to interrogation training, which kind of first piqued my interest in the whole sort of resilience/hardiness space. And then I left the military and became a bit of a geek. So I'm now an exercise scientist, I'm a nutritionist, I'm a neuroscientist, and I also have a PhD in psychology. So I call myself a psychophysiologist, and I work with companies around optimal performance and resilience and something called hardiness, which I'm calling resilience 2.0. So yeah, look, basically, I'm an Irishman who gets to talk for a living. It's brilliant.
Well, I mean, I was looking at your website before this, and I saw, like all the neuroscientists, all the things you were just listing there. I was like, fucking hell, I gotta up my game here. This guy's like doing a lot of stuff. Like, pretty impressive.
Man, I got to keep myself busy. The devil makes work for idle hands. I'm sure you've heard of that.
100%. It's a motto I think of a lot of the time as well. Yeah, got to always be striving for something. So, yeah, good to put it into positive use.
Absolutely.
So, yeah, can you tell me a bit about the work you do in companies? And I guess let's just jump into, I'd love to learn about what is hardiness? What do you this term that you're talking about?
Yeah, so look, I run, I do everything from keynote talks at conferences all the way through to 2-day workshops where it's a deeper dive, and everything is around performance, well-being, and resilience, or as I'm now calling it, hardiness, and kind of where those things meet. So it's really about that performance well-being, and it's really very well encapsulated by hardiness. I mean, I'd come across hardiness probably 20 years ago, and then sort of forgot about it, and was doing a lot of stuff on resilience. And then in COVID, I'm sure you will have noticed, everybody became a bloody resilience expert, and there was just shit on resilience everywhere. And I think it became the most overused word in the English language post-COVID. So I thought, and I was, delivering resilience workshops, and then I thought, oh, look, I need to tweak this a little bit. And that's where I kind of reacquainted myself with hardiness, and then dove into it pretty deeply in my PhD, which I just finished this year. So I was in my PhD looking at multimodal interventions, so body-brain interventions to improve cognitive fitness and hardiness. So cognitive fitness is performance under pressure. So that's kind of the area that I operate, is how do you perform under pressure in a sustainable way, because we can all perform under pressure for a short period of time and then burn ourselves out. And all the data is showing that burnout rates and levels of stress and de-stress are just going up across the globe, whether it's Australia, New Zealand, the USA, United Kingdom, Singapore, all of those things. And I think hardiness is actually a great antidote or a great intervention for this, because, and I'll just give you the kind of differentiation between resilience and hardiness. Resilience is really about bouncing back, whereas hardiness has been called the courage to grow from stress. And resilience is more of an outcome. It doesn't tell you how to get there, whereas hardiness actually tells you how to get there. And you can learn hardiness more than you can learn resilience. And I showed that in some of my PhD experiments. So it's basically, I call it resilience 2.0. It helps you to develop a mindset or a set of psychological orientations that actually prepare you really well for dealing with stress, and actually help you to not just get through it, but to actually grow because of exposure to stress.
Yeah, that's interesting, and congratulations on the PhD, by the way. That's another thing to add to your list. It's impressive. It's not an easy thing to do. But so, would you say it's almost like resilience is reactive and hardiness is being proactive? Because that's
boom, you've hit the nail on the head. The classic definition of resilience is about bouncing back. It's about bouncing back from adversity, and lots of people do resilience training after people have become screwed, right? Physically, mentally burnt out. Whereas hardiness is more forwards looking, whereas resilience is backwards looking.
Yeah, I mean, it's so interesting, because that's what I think is the problem at the moment. COVID elevated this, where it's amazing that we have so much talk about mental health, and I've been in this space for about 15 years, and if I look in even that window, it was barely talked about. It was so taboo to talk about it back then, and people talk about it now. But I think what has happened, like you're saying, resilience, the word's used everywhere. It's all these nice buzzwords, and they're not necessarily practical in terms of really improving your life long term. They might be able to help you at best to get through a tough situation. And then some of the tools as well that we learn, wellness has become such a big thing that there's all of these different things we can and should, and, people want to do, but you almost need the right conditions to do some of these complicated things, where what we need to learn is, how can I actually apply this stuff in real time? Like you're saying, when I'm under pressure, when things are not going my way, when I don't have time to, sit and go to a wellness retreat for 5 weeks and do blah, 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 whatever the trend is, how can this actually be practical for what the world actually is, which is chaotic?
Yeah, look, absolutely. And interesting, you mentioned all that, the mental health awareness has obviously gone through the roof. And that's a really good thing for a lot of people. So, people who traditionally wouldn't talk about having mental issues because of the stigma are now starting to talk about it. But like any intervention, there are unintended consequences that are not helpful. And what I mean by that is that there is now emerging research showing that the more you talk about mental health, the more you talk about emotions and you ask people about their emotions, they then start to identify more with negative emotions. And then they start to go, oh shit, yeah, maybe I do have an issue. So I find that it's really good for the people who have significant mental health issues, but it's also tipping over people who just have difficulties in life, like fucking Homo sapiens have had for 2 million years. Life is not easy. And the problem is that we're now pathologizing normal emotion. That, if somebody has somebody in their family that dies, it is normal to grieve for months, right? But now we're going, oh, well, that's not a normal condition. Here's an antidepressant. Or people who, are feeling low mood because they're under pressure, or they've just lost a job, or a relationship breakup. Now it's a condition that can be managed with medication. And so these are the unintended consequences. It even spills over into schools. I mean, I could talk all day about the impact on schools. And for me, we need to build our capacity to deal with stressful environments, not just be going, hey, you've got an issue, here's a label, here's a treatment. That can be pretty bad for quite a lot of people. But I do want to make the distinction between people with serious pathology, whether it's depression or anxiety or OCD or any of those things, whereas people who are way at the other end of the continuum, where it's just negative emotions now being pathologized and labeled.
100%. And I think it's like everything in life. You look at the political landscape, you look in general at the polarity in the world, and it's almost what's happened in this area where it wasn't talked about. Now it's talked about so much that it's become, people don't accept that life's meant to be hard, like you're talking about, and saying,
exactly.
I'm going to have a mental health day because I woke up on the wrong side of the bed. And it's tricky because at the same time, we need to be sensitive to the fact that, like you were talking about before, there are real mental health issues going on. But because it's not a tangible thing, how do you decipher between what is and what isn't? People can use it as a scapegoat. You see it in the media even. I've seen it with many, I'm sure you've seen many examples where people might have done something wrong and blame it on mental health. And
Absolutely.
It's so tricky. It's so tricky. Yeah.
Because you can't say anything then, because it's like, oh, you're being mean and nasty and stuff like that. And
yeah,
we mentioned about schools earlier on. It's like the issue now. There are lots of parents who are in both your country where you're living now, actually, and over here, and in the UK, where parents are pushing doctors and psychologists to get a diagnosis for their kids, because they get extra time on exams, they get like free rides on certain things, and there's a lot of these pushy parents who are trying to bulldoze a path for their kids to make, and what they're doing is they're screwing up their kids' futures. They are destroying their kids' resilience. One of the big things, I've talked to numerous psychologists about this, your kids can do and have to do hard stuff. Your job as a parent is not to forge an easy path for your children, because once they flee the nest and interact with the real world, they're going to come crashing down big time. And this is what we're seeing with a lot of young people getting out of university and going into the real world, where there's not a frigging trigger warning on a debrief from your boss, whereas at university there's trigger warnings everywhere. And you think of what happens, particularly if somebody's brain is slightly anxious or being exposed to stress or is not dealing well with things, and then you go trigger warning. What happens is their amygdala fires up and goes, oh, this is dangerous, this is bad, we need to avoid this. And they're given an out to avoid it. And all they're doing is eroding their capacity. The number one treatment for anxiety is exposure therapy. It's not avoidance. And what we're doing, again, and I want to stress, well-intentioned interventions that are really helpful for some people, but now not helpful for a lot of people. And even now the research is showing that avoidance and trigger warnings for PTSD are not helpful for these people, because they set up that pattern of avoidance. So, this is it's running very, very deep, but nobody talks about these unintended consequences, because if you talk about them, you get all sorts of shit. I mean, I was on a podcast last week, and I was talking about ADHD. One of the biggest predictors of a kid getting diagnosed with ADHD, do you know what it is? Next to their parents having had ADHD, so that genetic, do you know what the next biggest factor is?
No.
Date of birth.
Right.
So kids that are born late in the year, the latest 25%, have on average a 38% increased chance of being diagnosed with ADHD than kids who are born late in the year, the latest 25%. It's just because little Johnny is young. He doesn't have ADHD. He's just young. He's immature compared to his peers, and his focus and his attention skills are not developed. Give him 6 or 8 months, he'll be right up there. But no, what happens now is teachers go, little Johnny's disruptive. I think he might have ADHD, goes and does an assessment. And these assessments, I think a lot of them are problematic. A lot of them have leading questions, particularly for young people. And a lot of them can be tweaked as well. You know, this is my biggest problem with mental health diagnosis is there's not one mental health diagnosis that has a consistent biological signature, right? So what I mean by that, I know I've got diabetes or don't have diabetes because of my blood sugar. I know I have high blood pressure or don't have high blood pressure because of the biological signature. You know you have cancer because of the biological signature. Every single health condition, physical health condition, has a biological signature which they can go, bang, this is what you have. Mental health, it's all based on questionnaires.
Yeah, is ADHD actually a thing, do you think? Like it's something that people do have, but now we're just sort of blanketing it?
Absolutely. ADHD is a thing. Depression is a thing. Anxiety is a thing. But all of these, there's a continuum. Spectrum, There's a spectrum. Like Bill Gates has said that when he was a kid, if he had to get tested for ADHD, he would probably be diagnosed with ADHD. I would quite possibly be diagnosed with ADHD, right? Because stuff that I don't find interesting, I'm fucking shithouse. You ask my wife, I'm shithouse at focus on it. But if I'm interested, man, I get hyper-focused, right?
Same.
And Elon Musk has said the same thing, right? There are people who are now saying there's actually an ADHD phenotype, right? There is a phenotype of a collection of genes that lend to that actually has some advantages for creativity and all of those sorts of things. So now people who have severe ADHD, right? Like medication for them can be life-changing. But kids who actually have just inattentive issues, either because they're young or a combination of their diet shit, right? They don't do physical activity and they have screens in their bedroom and they're not sleeping well, right? I interviewed Professor Martin Ames. He showed 5 days of sleep deprivation, your brain looks like an ADHD brain. So absolutely. I think a lot of this is actually lifestyle driven, particularly the milder stuff. And I do want to make it very, very clear, I'm not talking about people with severe ADHD, who actually the medication for those people can be game changing. But people who are down that low end of the spectrum, where actually a lot of it's lifestyle or it's very, very mild, and then these kids are on Ritalin, they're on friggin' speed, right? That completely changes the brain. Like any psychoactive drug, any of those interventions, they all have huge amounts of side effects, particularly long term. You cannot take anything that is changing neurotransmitters in your brain and not have a significant amount of side effects, particularly in the long term.
Especially while your brain's developing, like you're saying,
especially while your brain is developing. That is absolutely right. And the worst of these, we're talking a lot about ADHD. The worst of it is depression. The Maudsley deprescribing guidelines. So these are the first ever guidelines that are giving doctors guidelines, psychologists guidelines for getting people off antidepressants. They have estimated, and I interviewed Mark Horowitz, who's a psychiatrist, him and I can't remember the other co-author. They estimate that only 15% of people who are on an antidepressant currently have a valid reason for being on those antidepressants. 15%. That's mental. And terrifying. A lot of people think that these drugs are safe and don't have many side effects. Nothing could be further from the truth. I would encourage, and I will send you the link so that you can share with it. There has been a number of studies that have been done surveying real people who have been on antidepressant medications. Looking at, again, I've interviewed some of these people, looking at the side effects, right? And more than 50% of people report having around 10 side effects, serious side effects, from sexual dysfunction, not feeling like myself, having everything being gray, suicidal ideation, especially when they try to get off them. More than 50% of people who are on antidepressant medications have suicidal thoughts when they try to get off them. Right? And the effectiveness of these drugs, they're way less effective than any exercise intervention. Right? They have an effect size. All right, their effect size is actually really small. It's just like slightly better than placebo, with a ridiculous amount of side effects. And I am certainly not critical of anybody who's on these drugs, but were they told by their doctor the amount of side effects and the effectiveness of those drugs? And only between 1% and 5% of people in these studies are ever told about the side effects.
100%. And there's just not enough regulation around how people are diagnosed, how they're put on different medications. And as you're talking about there, we don't have the education, we don't have the resource in the world to explore all of the other options before going down that path. Like you're saying, a lot of studies show exercise being as effective, if not more, than antidepressants.
Oh, it's more effective every time. More effective.
I think an exercise, I mean, we all know how beneficial it is. How many of us, with my company, that's really, what we're using as the forefront tool to try and help people to change their lifestyle, just get moving, exercise, because it will have a follow-on effect to every other part of your life. And, you're talking about anxiety before. I suffered from, that's the biggest thing I've suffered from. I had severe anxiety, depression in my 20s, and I saw so many therapists. I was put on medications and went off them because I didn't like it. Was told to do all these different things. Nothing worked. The only one thing that did work was immersion therapy. I was afraid of my own shadow. I was in university. I had to go and speak in front of, it was like 5-10 people, and I was terrified. Didn't want to do it, but I had to do it. That got me out of my head. Then I ended up having a career speaking in front of crowds of people. And
there you go.
And I learned the lesson in that. I was like, okay, hang on, my brain's telling me before I speak in front of these 5 people when I was terrified that I'm going to fuck it up. No one wants to hear what I have to say. This is going to be the end of the world. And I actually did a pretty bad job doing it, and it was still fine. And, doing that enough, I thought, this is great. I feel like a different person. I applied that to everything else. That has been the only thing that's really helped with the anxiety. You sit, worry about a problem, that's just going to compound. Go and take action, and you reduce it dramatically. So it's just, we're not taught how to do this. And this isn't to blame anyone for being in this position. This is a fault of society, how we're structured. We don't have the infrastructure to accommodate to all of the people that have these, that need this help.
And here's the thing. 85% of psychiatric medication is administered by non-psychiatric doctors.
It's crazy.
Right? Who don't have training in this, who think they read the back of the label and that's about the drug company. So how this goes back. So Professor John Reed has done a lot of work in this area, right? And he said, when they do the clinical trials to get the drug approved, they design the study and they design the side effects list. Right. And so they'll ask about a number of different things, and they only ask for, they do a very short-term study. But guess what happens? If you don't ask about suicidal thoughts, if you don't ask about sexual dysfunction, if you don't ask about not feeling like myself, they don't exist. Those side effects don't exist if you don't ask about them. Do you know what I mean? And then the doctor is then getting this pamphlet and going, well, there's no real issues with this. These things are fine. And I bet you my bottom dollar that you weren't told when you went, or you probably went on an SSRI for your anxiety and depression. And I bet you a doctor didn't sit you down and go, this is just marginally more effective than placebo. Exercise would be a more effective intervention. So would diet on its own. Even creatine and vitamin D supplementation is effective as these things. And by the way, here's a massive list of the side effects. You got a 50% chance of having suicidal ideation, a 50% chance of having sexual dysfunction, blah, 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 blah. I bet you didn't get that discussion from your doctor.
So why are we not having that as just basic fundamental training for doctors?
Gee, you need to ask. You need to ask whoever is doing the training for the doctors. Now, GPs, to be fair to GPs, they're under huge amounts of pressure, right? They have, I don't know what it's like in the United States, but in Australia, it's like a 15-minute appointment. Sometimes it's even less than that. And then this person's coming in, and often the individual is asking for medication because they hear about these medications and they go in, and the doctor's just like, right, shit, I just need to get this done. A lot of them. Now, some of them are different, but I think it's the whole system. I do believe it's the whole system. I'm not pointing the finger at GPs. A lot of them don't know this because they don't have time to go and do the research and to find it out and to interview people like Professor Mark Horowitz, Professor John Reed, who are actually in the coalface doing the research. That's the problem.
Yeah. And governments are traditionally just reactive, and they don't really want to challenge the status quo. They don't want to have to dip into the budget to, deal with the proactive solutions, and then we stay on that hamster wheel.
Yeah, absolutely. And the Mark Horowitz and Joanna Moncrief, they actually did the study that completely destroyed the serotonin hypothesis of depression. But still, there's a lot of people think that depression is caused by low serotonin. Now, serotonin obviously plays a role, but it's stress that is the major driver of depression. And that mixed in with lack of physical activity, a poor diet, and lack of sleep, that's a trifecta. And here's what I actually say to people, and I say it without any judgment whatsoever. I say to people, if you're not physically active and you eat a diet high in ultra-processed foods, and you got your phone in your room and you don't have great sleep hygiene, good luck with your mental health, because you friggin' well need it, because you are swimming upstream, right? What most people don't realize, a diet high in ultra-processed foods, there was a systematic review and meta-analysis, an umbrella review actually, that looked at all of the different studies that found that people in the highest amount of ultra-processed food consumption had a 48% increased risk of anxiety versus those low, and had a 53% increased risk of common mental health disorders. And this was class 1 convincing evidence. Why is that not on every front page newspaper, right? So that's one thing. Then we take physical activity. If you're not highly physically active, you're depriving your brain, not just of endorphins, which everybody knows about, but serotonin, dopamine, noradrenaline, endocannabinoids, and enkephalins. There is 6 different neurotransmitter systems that are activated through physical activity that make your brain function better and improve your mood. And when people are not physically active, they deprive their brain of the neurotransmitters that it needs to function normally. And then you throw in sleep, and I mentioned earlier on, lack of sleep drives anxiety, depression, ADHD symptoms, all of those things, right? Dutch researchers showed in 2019 that if you interfere with REM sleep, you can cause anxiety in both animals and humans. Right. So there's so many lifestyle factors. And then, it's the busy life and all of the stress thrown into that. Like that is just mental health issues waiting to happen.
No wonder, male suicide is so high. It makes sense when you talk about, when you point out all of these different factors. And it's so difficult because once you're in the pattern of bad sleep, you're not going to want to eat as well. You're going to have no motivation to exercise, and it just
Yeah,
compounds in a negative cycle
it,
that you can't get out of. So it's,
that's exactly right. I mean, Nick, what most people don't realize, after a poor night's sleep, um, ghrelin, your major hunger hormone, is higher. Stress hormones are higher the entire next day. And that combination of ghrelin and cortisol makes you crave sugary, fatty, and salty foods, the ultra processed foods that are available everywhere. What's lower the entire next day after a bad night's sleep is leptin. That is a powerful action on voluntary physical activity in the brain. That means that after a bad night's sleep, not only you're more likely to eat more and eat more shit, you're more likely to sit on your arse all day long. You're a lot less likely to exercise. Then you're less able to handle the stresses of the day's events because exercise is the best stress buster there is. And then you're more likely to go home that night stressed and soothe your stress with either alcohol or shit food, which both interfere with your sleep that night. And then it's Groundhog Day. Right. And then with that chronic lack of physical activity, there are changes in the brain, and then that stress coming in, creating glutamate, killing off neurons, and impacting on neurotransmitter systems. And then you have the diet of ultra processed foods, destroying your gut microbiome and then impacting upon your brain. It is just a disaster for mental health. Modern lifestyle is a disaster for mental health.
it's shocking. So it's almost like saying, if you want to torture someone, just get them to live in the modern world without having any knowledge of what they should do to better themselves.
That's right. And that's why I wrote my first book, Death by Comfort, Why Modern Life is Killing Us and What We Need to Do About it. Because it is like, you take any animal out of their natural environment, they do shit house. They really are shit house. And us humans have been taken out of our natural environment, right? And we know what the natural environment's like by studying hunter-gatherer tribes like the Hadza, who live in Tasmania and currently live hunter-gatherer lifestyles. And their gut microbiome is way more diverse than ours. They do 7 to 10 times the amount of vigorous physical activity as the average American or the average Australian or average Brit, right? And when you understand exercise biology and exercise neurobiology, you start to go, fucking hell, this is causative. Right?
We're not doing what we're built to do, yeah.
We're not doing what we're built to do. We really aren't. And I'm not suggesting that everybody goes and becomes a hunter-gatherer again, because clearly that's not the way ahead. But we can all choose what goes in our gob on a daily basis, right? And again, I'm not suggesting that you only eat like a hunter-gatherer. We have the 80-20 rule in our house, where 80% of food that we eat has been alive recently. You can look at that and go, you've been alive recently and minimally interfered with by humans. We call it low HI diet. Whereas, if you're looking at a Krispy Kreme donut, you're going, I don't remember seeing you running around on 4 legs, right? So 80-20 rule around that. Everybody can choose what they do around their sleep, right? The worst thing you can do is to be sitting on your social media or to be watching a screen, getting a combination of blue light and cognitively stimulating activities that actually actively destroys your sleep. Having too much caffeine. There are people who can have a double espresso and go straight to sleep. But what we know is they spend a lot less time in deep sleep, right? And there are so many restorative biological processes that happen when you're asleep, that when you mess with sleep, you mess with your biology, right? And for the gentlemen who are listening to this, we know that 3 nights bad sleep and your balls shrink. I kid you not, measurable changes in the size of your nuts after 3 nights bad sleep, and your testosterone resembles that of someone that is 10 years older, right?
Oh my God. Well, that should be enough to scare
That's the one
any...
that most gentlemen go, oh, now you got my attention.
Exactly. Yep, that'll fucking snap you into action. That's crazy. Yeah, and so all of that, it's unbelievable, because that's like not even what you just talked about there, not even looking at the mindset side of
Yeah.
how overexposed to information we are. We like our brain's not fucking built to take in this much stuff, and it is overwhelming. It's unavoidable, but we need measures in place. And I can't remember what psychologist I was listening to, but he was talking about the hunter-gatherer times and how, you'd be out in a field and you're going about your daily activities. You're almost in sort of you're not thinking most of the time. You're in a flow state, the majority of the time.
You're mindful, absolutely. One of the best things. Sorry to cut you off. One of the best things that depressed people can do shit with your hands. Do not sit around. Get a project, work with your hands, because when you're working with your hands, you're completely mindful and your brain isn't off. And you're not in your own head, right? That's a bad place to be for a lot of people, right? Whether it's anxiety or depression, get busy. Do stuff with your hands so that you're not spending time in your own head, because that's not a good place for most people unless you're a philosopher.
Yeah, exactly. And, that's what I found. Like, I had to just be active. I got into acting. I got doing a podcast. I love this kind of stuff because you can't think. We're in the moment. You don't have time to think about all the other stuff going on in the world, but we just don't have enough of that in day-to-day life. And I think all of us can easily fall into that pattern of just being in our head.
It is so easy, and as you said, you throw modern life in there, and people are busy at work. They've got they're running their kids around. They got all sorts of shit going on, and then they come home, and as soon as they walk in the door, this little voice goes, "You've had a hard day. You need a drink," right? And then they're sitting, they might have a few glasses of wine or a few beers, and they're just watching TV, and they're just like, this is my recovery. And I say to them, that's not recovery. That's relaxation. And I'm not saying there's no time for relaxation, but do not kid yourself that you're recovering. That is not recovery. Recovery is having hobbies, is catching up with friends, is going out and exercising, doing ice baths, doing saunas, doing breath work, doing yoga, meditation, prayer, if you're into that. That's the sort of stuff that's recovery. Watching TV is not recovery. Scrolling on social media is not recovery. It's relaxation. And it's stimulating, but it's stimulatory for our sympathetic nervous system. And if you're already highly stressed, what you're doing is you're just pushing yourself more into sympathetic nervous system. And that, I believe, is the big driver of mental health issues, is spending too much time in our sympathetic nervous system.
If you're feeling stuck, you're not alone. Most people don't realize how connected your mental health is to your body, from your gut to your sleep, movement, food, mindset. Getting active each day can shift how you feel, build confidence, and transform your quality of life. At Move Your Mind, we guide you through this process step by step. If this resonates and you want to learn more, simply go to my Instagram at Nick Brax and click the link on the bio to fill out an application, and I'll send you over more information about the program. Thank you so much for supporting this podcast. If you find the show helpful, please share it with a friend and follow me on Instagram. It really helps. Yeah. Are you hopeful about the future of where things are heading? Because I look at it and, the fact that these kind of conversations are happening, people are open to hearing about it, fantastic. But at the same time, with where the pace at which the world's moving in a certain direction, it's very hard to see how things are going to change on a broad societal level.
Yeah, I'm hopeful for small sections of society. There are more and more people who are becoming interested in proactive health, in longevity, and all of these sorts of things, increasing their health span, getting into all of the exercise and the clean eating. But I'm really not very hopeful for people who are in the lower socioeconomic status, because all the research shows that they are at severe disadvantages when it comes to treatment, even when it comes to education around these things. And there's a lot of people doing it tough. There's a lot of single parents out there, single moms, single dads, and then also when you then have a divorce and you got two different parents with two different sets of values, trying to raise kids in a consistent environment becomes really, really difficult. And particularly, there are large parts of society where there's generational unemployment, and there's just not enough investment in these people. So I think we're going to see more and more of a split where, the well-educated, well-resourced people are going to be more and more proactive around their health and have better mental health and have better longevity and have better health span. But I really am concerned about lower socioeconomic stuff because there's just not enough education. There's not enough resource. They're already living much more difficult lives than well-off people. And it's friggin' hard, really hard if you're economically disadvantaged to live the sort of lifestyle that supports good physical and mental health.
It can be almost impossible, like you're saying there. If you're swimming in debt, you've got a family, kids, you're working 3 jobs.
Yeah,
It almost sounds offensive to say to someone in that position, "Oh, by the way, why don't you take some time out and try and do all these different things?" Even though
yeah,
that probably would help, it's
yeah.
very hard. But then,
Mm.
what's the solution? I don't know, like a
And
Scandinavian model potentially.
yeah, yeah, and you need to improve your diet and stuff. And
Mm,
it is those Scandinavian models, but they're
mm.
it's not consistent with where you live. It's not consistent where I live. It's not consistent with the UK and lots of other places. I think the Scandinavians have got their shit sorted a lot better than most of the world when it comes to a lot of social issues. And they've got high trust in government and all of that because their government aren't fucking frauds. You know what I mean?
And
So
yeah, exactly. Even though, like, you try and talk about a system like that for the US, for example, people would tell you to fuck off. And it's like,
yeah,
well,
that's right.
why are people so like have all this think it's conspiratory or all of it? People want to. It's like, why can't we look at a system that can help the greater good? But we have all these different views, and everyone's got an opinion, and there are positives and negatives, but that makes sense to me what they're doing in Scandinavia in terms of giving people a chance. If you've got a
Yeah,
base level of government support or income,
yeah.
if you even that out, then you actually have at least an opportunity to try and have a somewhat balanced life.
Yeah, then there's all of the lobbying of government. So we'll take Australia, right, where I currently live and you were born. Australia has, I think you have to fact check this, but it's something like 0.03% of the world's population, right? We got about 25, 26 million people in Australia. We
Mm.
have 19% of the world's pokie machines. 19%
19%.
of the entire pokie machines in the entire world, right? One-armed bandits, as my dad used to call them. Remember when they had the one arm that you'd have to pull? 19% of the world's pokie machines are in Australia. We Australians gamble $32 billion a year, right? That is over
Jesus.
$1,000 lost per head, and successive governments will not do something about it because of the lobbying of the gambling lobby and the amount of money that they get from these people, right? And we know that gambling
Fucking hell.
is disproportionately affects lower socioeconomic people. It massively increases poverty. It massively increases poor health outcomes, physical health, poor mental health outcomes. It massively increases domestic violence. Like, there's so much shit around it, but the government won't do anything about it.
And is that why it's not talked about a lot in, like,
Yeah.
I didn't, this isn't something that seems to be talked about in day-to-day conversation in
Yeah,
Australia.
well, there are certain politicians who are going, we got to do something about this. And there was, I can't remember her name, Peter something or other. She did a big review of it. She ended up dying of cancer. The government's just sat on it. They just friggin' sat on it because it's all about money, 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 money.
That's shocking. That's fucked up. That is really fucked up.
Mate,
I'm glad you brought that up. I'm glad I know about that. I've learned more about that from this conversation. That's crazy.
yeah, and then big food is more powerful than big pharma or big tobacco. Most people don't realize some of the world's biggest food companies were purchased by tobacco companies in the 1980s when they realized their time was up, right? And so they started transferring a lot of their executives and their knowledge into this, and then started doing exactly what tobacco had done, where they'll fund research studies and influence those research studies to provide a bit of doubt in people's minds. And we're starting to see this now coming out about all the ultra processed foods. And they are now, big food are paying certain prominent dietitians and all of this to come and speak out on their behalf, right? Big food. So Dietitians Australia, which is supposed to be an independent body, governing body, was outed by an investigative journalist, Marianne Demasai, I think her name was, for receiving money every single year from the Australian breakfast cereal manufacturers lobby to promote their products, right? And this is supposed to be an independent organization, right? And so there's all sorts of dodgy shit that's going on behind the scenes around food and things like that. And ultra processed foods are much more profitable for the manufacturers. They're much more profitable for the supermarkets as well. 77% of all foods in Australian supermarkets are ultra processed, and it'll be the same in the United States, right? In the United States, 66% of all calories consumed by kids and teenagers are ultra processed shit. The evidence is clear. This stuff is killing us, and it's killing our kids.
It's shocking, and it's so addictive. It's just, it's awful.
There are food scientists all around the world trying to work out the bliss point. Have you ever heard of bliss point?
No.
So the bliss point is a combination of at least two of three, fat, carbohydrate, and sugar. In particular combinations, there has to be a certain blend of those, whether it's two of the three or all three, that when they get the blend right, it hijacks our reward systems in the brain, releases more dopamine, makes these foods addictive, right? Pringles have got the strap line for all ultra-processed foods. Once you pop, you can't stop.
You can't stop,
and it's because of the bliss point, right? And you eat these ultra-processed foods, they are so moreish because they're designed to hijack your brain. That's the thing. They're designed to be addictive. And then they're cheap as well because they're generally from processed carbohydrates and shitty stuff, and they have all sorts of additives in them that extends their shelf life. They have emulsifiers that make them feel amazing in your mouth. And what we now know is they all disturb your gut microbiome, and your gut microbiome sends signals to your brain. So you mess with your gut microbiome, you fuck up your mood. It's as simple as that. And these foods are actually doing it. But these companies are out on the front foot combating against it.
Well, it's again like what we were saying about mental health on a global scale. You look to the future and you can see small groups of people making changes in this area, but to see the whole society change, it seems like that's a long way away, if ever, because it's just so systemic.
Yeah, absolutely. And the research is now showing that as third world countries start to develop more, they're becoming more and more supermarkets in those countries. And the higher the proportion of supermarkets in a country, the higher the proportion of ultra processed foods eaten by the population, because the local greengrocer goes, the local butcher goes. This is convenient. It's a one-stop shop, but 77% of it is ultra processed shit, right? Which is convenient, right? I don't have time to make dinner. Here's an ultra processed TV dinner that looks healthy, right? Here's a protein bar. Here's a health bar, right? That people don't realize is ultra processed. Here's breakfast cereals that are saying high in fiber, high in calcium, that doesn't say, oh, by the way, 30% sugar, right? And highly processed. So it's difficult for consumers, and these companies have hit the nail on the head, right? Highly convenient, shelf stable, long shelf life, cheap, and hijack your brain. Fucking hell, what a business model.
Exactly. It's a good business model, but it's highly depressing. And it's just, the world's crazy, isn't it? It's depressing when you peel back the layers of these different areas and
Yeah.
you just realize like we're very advanced and we've made so much progress forward, but we're also so fucking stupid and we're just killing ourselves. It's nuts.
Yeah, and again, it's disproportionately affecting lower socioeconomic people, which is
Yeah.
the thing that kind of keeps me up at night, right? Because it's number
Same.
one, how do you reach them? How do you educate them? But then how do you enable them as well? All the stuff you talked about earlier on when they're working 3 jobs, their kids, they might be a single parent, or even if they're not, their kids are hanging out with a bad crowd, and it's just hard.
It's shocking, and it is hard to help that area. Even if I look at the work that I do in mental health, I've had to do a lot of work in companies with people that can afford the service because you go out of
Yeah.
business otherwise. But if I had unlimited money, I would go and just dedicate my time to looking at what can I do in that area. But it's hard to help that area unless you're resourced enough, and then it's tricky.
Yeah, and it's going to take courage from governments to do the things that might be unpopular for the people who give them money. That's the big issue, right? Is that they've got to ignore all the bloody lobbyists in Canberra. They've got to go, shit, we need to get our funds elsewhere. I think, having societies where companies can donate to politicians, that's a fucked society. That is going to, and anybody who thinks that the United States, United Kingdom, that the Australia are pure democracies without corruption need their friggin' heads boiled. It's just corruption of a different flavor.
Yeah, it's built for corruption if companies are able to do that.
It's totally built for it.
It's crazy. It's crazy. So, I mean, we could probably do a podcast series on that one topic. So,
Yes.
if I just circle back to the hardiness, would you say is that similar to Stoicism?
There's certainly elements of Stoicism. So I'll give you the very quick thing on hardiness. So there's 3 psychological orientations. I've actually added a 4th because I think it's really important. The first is a control orientation. This is where I deeply believe that I can control or influence my environment or my destiny. It's what we call an internal locus of control. People like that understand that the universe will throw up challenges and the occasional shit sandwich, but ultimately they are in control. And they tend to focus on the stuff that they can control and not invest their energy in the stuff they can't control, right? A lot of people with some, now not everybody, but a fair chunk of people with whether it's depression, anxiety, they're trying to change the past, they're trying to control the future, they're trying to control or change other people's behaviors, they're trying to make the universe bend around them, and they're focusing a lot of energy on the stuff that they can't control. So high-hardy people know that you have to focus on what you can control, particularly under stress and pressure. And the thing that you can always control is how you react to your circumstances. Nobody can ever take that from you. Viktor Frankl called it the last of human freedoms, right? So that's control orientation. The next is commitment orientation, where I view both change and adversity as opportunities for me to learn and grow, and not something to be scared of, right? And that completely changes your psychology and your physiology, right? So if we are both presented with a potential stressor, if I view it as a threat, or as you view it as a challenge, and we make those stress appraisals very, very quickly in the brain, but our psychology becomes very different. You activate dopamine, which is leaning in, it's engagement, it's motivation, it's desire to act. Whereas, so you're in what we call approach mode in psychology, whereas I go into avoidance mode. I bury my head in the sand, I procrastinate, I delay, I even run away, right? But the physiology, Mark Seary has shown this, is very different in us. You, with a challenge response, activate the fight part of the fight or flight nervous system. That involves the hormones adrenaline and noradrenaline, which in the country that you now live in are called epinephrine and norepinephrine. What happens when you activate those chemicals? Your cardiovascular system dilates. All your blood vessels dilate, blood flow increases, blood flow and oxygen to the brain increases, your breathing rate increases, you dump blood sugar into the system, you are preparing your body to engage in the challenge. Whereas with a threat response, I activate the HPA axis, hypothalamus, pituitary gland, adrenal gland, releasing cortisol. That puts me into shutdown, avoidance, runaway mode. But my cardiovascular system constricts. Blood flow is less oxygen and blood flow to the brain. My body is now going into freeze mode. And here's what's really critical. The half-life of those chemicals are very, very different. In you, the half-life of adrenaline, noradrenaline, or epinephrine, norepinephrine, 1 to 2 minutes. And about 4 half-lives, and that chemical is back to its normal level. So within 10 minutes of that stressor, you're back to homeostasis. With me, cortisol has a half-life of way longer than an hour. So 5 hours after that event, I'm still having a stress reaction in my body and my brain. It's attacking my brain, affecting my neurotransmitter systems, impacting on my mood over time, impacting on my cognitive function over time, interfering with my sleep. And we talked about that earlier on. And all of this comes from how you view a potential stressor. But here's the really important thing. You, as Nick, can only really view that as a challenge purely if you believe that you have the resources to deal with it. And this is where one of my favorite quotes from Epictetus: we must all undergo a hard winter training and not enter into lightly that for which we have not prepared. And he was talking about life. So to build your challenge muscle, you have to do hard shit, right? You can also read philosophy, and particularly Stoic philosophy, and that helps you to think so, but you also have to put it into action. And this is where I get very simple with people: is exercise at a capacity that you don't want to. Get uncomfortable. Take cold showers, take ice baths, do stuff, do public speaking if it scares the shit out of you. Start low. You've got to do stuff that challenges you in order to build your challenge muscle, because it's just like your physical muscles. If you use them, they grow stronger. If you don't use them, they atrophy. And this is my problem with the whole avoidance, trigger warning stuff and our kids, is that they're atrophying their challenge muscle, their control muscle. And then the third one is commitment. Commitment is about being fully engaged in life's activities, whether it's work, your social life, or it's about having outside of work. It's about having hobbies, what the Japanese call ikigai, a little reason to live, being engaged, not sitting on your head in a fucking screen, being a passive consumer of life. And some people, if they look at their screen time, right? If you have about 3 hours a day on a screen time, and you extrapolate that, by the time you're in your 80s and you're looking back on your life, you will have spent more than a decade, every single second of every single day of a decade, with your head buried in a freaking screen. Is that the life that you really want? Like I don't remember. I don't remember. And some people have 6 hours a day of their screen. That is over, if they live to be 100, that is 25 years. Every single second of every minute of every day for 25 years with their head buried in a fucking screen, right? This is, I think, a huge burden on society, right? But the other part of commitment is feeling that life has a sense of meaning and purpose. And I think we are in an existential crisis today. There's that vacuum of meaning and purpose. Some of that, I think, and I'm as far from a religious person as you could find, but I think a lot of it, some of it, is due to the breakdown of religion. Because any religion, I don't care what it is, whether it's Buddhism, Christianity, Sufism, Islam, they all give people a set of values and a sense of being connected to something that's bigger than themselves. And then if you don't have that, you got to work it out. You got to do the work. You got to work out what is my meaning and purpose. And life, the only meaning of life is what you give it, right? But you got to work out what are my values, right? What's the stuff that's important to me? How do I guide my behavior in times of stress, right? So and the other thing about commitment is being committed to your own well-being, right? And then the last one that I have added in is a connection orientation, because we know that human connection is so important. And we are more digitally connected, but more socially disconnected than we have ever been. And it's a big problem. We know that when you lean into someone, oxytocin and vasopressin are released in both people's brains. Now, they're the hormones of love, trust, and social bonding, but they're also the most potent anti-stress chemicals that human beings produce, right? So they're together are the 4 C's: challenge, control, commitment, and connection. And because I'm a psychophysiologist in control, I talk a lot about controlling things in your own environment around your lifestyle, like your exercise, your recovery, your heart rate variability, your nutrition, your sleep hygiene, your breath work. They're all things that are under our control. So when you bring the physiology to meet the psychology, there's where the magic happens.
And it's incredibly powerful what you just talked about, and that the practicality of that's incredible. Like, it makes so much sense, and it's just distilling all of these critical, systems into one, one very easy to follow structure. It's just it's so important, and I guess it's like, I talk a lot about failure. If we look at that as we're going to learn from it, it changes, like you're saying, completely how you're going to perceive it. But we fall into the other side most of the time unless we challenge it. And it's like what you were saying there, we either need to challenge this stuff ourselves or, religion, I agree. Like, I think the structure it gave people was amazing, but then, like everything, we use it to control people, and it goes out of, it turns into a cult essentially, and then it fucks everything up. And but we need, if we're not going to be able to learn how to actually take personal accountability to make these changes, we do need broader structure. We need one or the other or both.
Yeah, that's right. And it's a religion. For me, it's very similar to the world of nutrition, right? There are all sorts of nutritional eating guidelines around the world, just like there's all sorts of religions around the world, and they all provide a structure. And a lot of people, I spend a lot of time trying to educate people on low HI diet and the 80-20 rule, and people go, yeah, that's great. Can you just give me an eating plan? They just want the plan dropped in their lap and just let me follow it, right? Not I need to think about it and do the work and stuff like that. That becomes an issue. And then, you look at it with that vacuum of religion, then what is coming in and sucked up that vacuum is the political stance. And we see that being played out right where you are, and in the UK and now in Australia, where it's becoming more and more polarized, right? Yeah. And it's like, it's around everything is gained around this, right? It's like, it just then, your politics determines your view on fucking everything. And it's just like you have these people who don't think for themselves. It's mental.
It's out of control. It's totally out of control. And I don't know. That's a whole nother conversation, isn't it? But it is mental. It really is. It's fucked. So we need to start somewhere. Yeah, we need to be able to. Yeah.
Hopefully, in this podcast, there's a few little tips for people to unfuck themselves. Right. That's the key in a fucked up world. How do you? Summary. Yes, exactly. That should be the podcast. How to unfuck yourself in a fucked up world.
I think that's what I'll go with, mate. I think that's pretty much sums it up. Listen to this if you want to unfuck yourself in a fucked up world. I like it. It's good. We need it. Well, mate, I think I could talk to you all day about this stuff. I think it's so insightful, and I'll have to have you back on here because it's just there's so much to discuss. So thank you for sharing all of it. We finish every episode with 5 closing questions, which I'll go into in a sec. Before I do that, where can our listeners go if they want to learn more about you, they want to contact you, look at your work, whatever else, where can we send them?
Well, my podcast, if they want to dive into this, I've got a podcast called the Hardiness podcast. So that'd be the first one. Also, my website, which is paultaylor.biz. And then I am on Instagram and on LinkedIn as well, which I'll flick you the links for those.
Amazing. Well, we'll have all of that in the show notes, so make sure to check it out. And closing questions. The first one, what is your best childhood memory that comes to mind for you?
Oh, best childhood memory. Shit the bed. Oh, wow. La 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 la. Fucking hell. It would probably, I reckon it would be being on a 2-week scout camp when I was maybe 9 or 10 years old. We did lots of adventure stuff, right? That's probably the one that just jumps into my head straight off the bat without any time to think about it.
Love it. Love it. When was the last time you were vulnerable?
Oh, probably in January when I had open heart surgery.
Oh, wow.
Because I play soccer with a cardiologist, and I said, hey, mate, I'm now in my 50s. I want to get a checkup. He did a checkup and said, hey, good news is you're fit as a fiddle. Bad news is we just found you were born with a heart defect. I was born with a dodgy aortic valve. So it was probably then. I reckon that was probably it. Yeah, we'll go with that one.
Wow. Yeah, there you go. That's
But I chose to view it as my worthy opponent. I use the words of Seneca. I pity the man who's not faced adversity because he's not faced a worthy opponent, and no one, not even him, knows what he is capable of.
I love that. And you know, it's like synchronicity that moment happened and you got it checked, because if it was something you're born with, well, it could have been left too late. So, thank God that happened.
It would eventually have killed me if I hadn't have been proactive.
Wow.
So I'm a lucky boy. Yeah.
One of those moments. Do you have any regrets in life?
Oh, not many, because all the things that I've done in life have created who I am. And yeah, I've made a lot of fuck ups, but not many regrets, because over time, and I think, wisdom comes with age. You look back on those and you kind of go, all right, well, that's a way not to behave, right? So for me, there's a difference between mistakes and regrets. Lots of mistakes, not very many regrets.
Yeah, because there can't really be, because as long as you learn from the mistakes, they sort of get you to where you need to get to. So
that's right. Yeah. And there's shit that if I go back in time, would I do it differently? Yeah, I probably would. But in the grand scheme of things, all of that factors into who you are.
Absolutely. If you could go back in time, as you were just saying there, to when you were 18, what advice would you give yourself?
Stop being a dickhead.
I'd probably do the same. I like that one. Well, final one. What would you say to you? What does it mean to be truly happy?
To be fully engaged with life, to be curious, and to be useful member of a tribe.
I love it. Well, Paul, thank you so much, mate, for being so open, for sharing so much of your wisdom and knowledge. And I've taken an enormous amount out of this, and I know our listeners will. So I appreciate you making the time.
Cool. Thanks for having me on, Nick, and keep doing your work, mate. If we can just influence a couple of people at a time, then job done.
And thank you for listening. I'd love to hear your thoughts on the episode and any suggestions for topics you'd like to hear about. Feel free to leave a comment or send me a DM. Your feedback is always appreciated. Please don't forget to click the subscribe button, leave a like or comment, share with your friends, and follow me on Instagram. It really makes a difference. Thank you so much.